Have you ever felt an inexplicable chill while interacting with someone, as if something unseen yet deeply unsettling stirred beneath the surface of their smile? Carl Jung, one of history's most profound psychologists, uncovered a disturbing pattern during his decades of clinical study. A silent signal, more dangerous than any physical threat, lurks in plain sight. This signal is often ignored by the conscious mind but sensed instinctively by our most primal awareness. It doesn't show up as loud hostility or obvious toxicity. It's subtler, and precisely because of that, far more dangerous. Ancient wisdom warned of such people, but Jung gave scientific shape to what our ancestors merely intuited. And the most disturbing part? This signal can emanate from those who appear completely normal, even charismatic. When you perceive it, the wisest response is to withdraw. Shadow projection. It may be the most perilous psychological mechanism Jung ever identified in human relationships. Picture this. You're in a conversation, and suddenly someone accuses you of harboring intentions or traits you've never expressed. They aren't reacting to you, but to a distorted figure they've created in their own mind. Sound familiar? That's the projection of the Jungian shadow in its purest form. The shadow is everything we reject within ourselves, the aspects we deem unacceptable and banish to the unconscious. But these parts don't disappear. They linger, gathering energy in the hidden depths of the psyche. When someone habitually projects their shadow onto others, they are revealing the most dangerous signal Jung ever observed. A total inability to recognize their own denied qualities. Such a person genuinely cannot see these traits in themselves, so they spot them only in others. Here's the danger. To them, you truly embody those negative traits. Ancient spiritual traditions understood this long before Jung gave it language. In Buddhism, it's the darkened mirror that reflects one's own impurities as if they belong to someone else. In Christianity, it's the beam in one's own eye while pointing out the speck in another's. What makes this so terrifying is that the person projecting their shadow is utterly convinced they're seeing the truth. They aren't consciously lying. They truly believe you are what they refuse to see in themselves. This perceptual distortion creates a chilling kind of certainty, one that can persuade others. They might convince people around them that you are exactly as they say. Modern neuroscience has since confirmed what Jung postulated. The brain filters reality to support existing beliefs. But in cases of extreme shadow projection, this filter doesn't just distort, it completely warps reality. Researcher Robert Johnson compared this to wearing glasses that change everything you see. So how can you tell when someone is projecting their shadow onto you? The giveaway is a disconnect, a fracture between what they claim about you and what you know to be true in yourself. They accuse you of motivations you've never held, emotions you haven't felt, and they do it with unwavering confidence, untouched by any contrary evidence. What's really happening? You've become the battlefield for someone else's internal war. They are waging a desperate fight against parts of themselves they cannot accept, and you are their unwitting opponent. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, says the old proverb, but Jung might have added, and driven by those who believe themselves unquestionably good. Ego inflation is one of the most treacherous dangers, precisely because it hides behind virtue. When you see someone utterly convinced of their moral superiority, their spiritual infallibility, or their possession of absolute truth, you are witnessing what Jung called psychic inflation. And this perhaps is the most alarming signal of all. Unlike ordinary arrogance, which is easy to recognize, Jungian inflation is far more insidious. It occurs when the ego identifies with archetypal forces, especially the savior, the enlightened one, or the bearer of cosmic truth. This person no longer sees themselves as a fallible human being, but as a vessel of the divine or the absolute. The German mystic Meister Eckhart warned of this centuries ago, calling it the most subtle trap on the spiritual path. Zen traditions call it Zen sickness. Sufis speak of the veil of light, far more dangerous than the veil of darkness. Because it is far more difficult to recognize as an obstacle, this particular sign reveals itself subtly. You'll notice it when a person never questions their own motivations. While history's greatest sages have spoken with humility before the vast mysteries of existence, those gripped by psychic inflation radiate absolute certainty. What makes this state particularly dangerous is its seductive charisma. Jung observed how individuals suffering from extreme psychic inflation often attracted devoted followers, precisely because of the unwavering conviction they exude. This kind of certainty offers something profoundly tempting: relief from uncertainty. It satisfies a deep human hunger for clarity and security in a chaotic world. Chilean psychologist Claudio Naranjo, a student of spiritual traditions, warned that the spiritual ego is the most refined and the most difficult to detect. The ordinary ego proclaims, "I am important," but the inflated spiritual ego declares, "I am a channel of the supreme good." This subtle distinction explains why so many are drawn to individuals who appear spiritually elevated, yet may be profoundly dangerous. How can you recognize psychic inflation? Watch how someone responds to criticism or disagreement. The person inflated by archetypal ego does not see dissent as helpful insight, but as an attack on cosmic order itself. To them, opposition is not merely human disagreement. It is resistance to the good, the true, or the divine that they believe they embody. Jung warned that this psychological state endangers not only others, but most of all, the one who suffers it. When the small personal ego becomes fused with transpersonal, archetypal contents, the psyche is subjected to immense internal pressure, a tension that demands eventual compensation. The greater the inflation, the more devastating the collapse when the denied aspects of the self inevitably erupt. And what could be more unsettling than someone who always appears exactly as you expect, always composed, always agreeable, always correct? Jung identified a disturbing pattern in such individuals, a level of social adaptation so flawless it erases all rough edges, contradictions, and spontaneity. This polished facade, the persona, a term Jung borrowed from ancient Greek theatre, is not just a mask, it's a warning. Our instincts often detect the danger long before our conscious mind can explain it. Complete identification with the persona is a serious psychological risk. It signals a split between outer image and inner reality. The person has sacrificed authenticity at the altar of social approval, constructing a mask so refined, even they forget what lies behind it. As the poet Fernando Pessoa once wrote, the danger is not in the mask, but in forgetting that it is a mask. Eastern contemplative traditions have echoed this truth for millennia. In Zen Buddhism, there is the concept of the original face before birth, a symbol of uncorrupted authenticity beyond all social constructs. Taoist sages warned of the peril in polishing the surface so obsessively that the inner substance wears away. Jung translated these timeless insights into modern psychology. The signal arises when you sense something strangely artificial in someone's presence. Despite their perfect manners, measured tone, and ideal expressions, there is a hollowness, a lack of the unpredictable, contradictory spark that defines real humanity. As Jungian analyst James Hollis observed, excessive perfection in social adaptation often reveals an equally excessive emptiness within. Modern neuroscience supports this, identifying a fascinating mechanism at play: mirror neurons. These specialized cells detect subtle inconsistencies between someone's words, facial expressions, and body language. When a person's social mask is divorced from their internal reality, these neurons sound the alarm, and we experience it as a vague unease or distrust. But the real danger lies not in the mask itself, but in what it conceals. When someone devotes all their psychic energy to upholding a perfect external image, the rejected parts of the self don't vanish. They gather below the surface, forming what Jung called the shadow. And the more rigid the persona, the more volatile the shadow becomes, waiting, building, until it finally breaks free. Marie-Louise von Franz, one of Jung's closest collaborators, noted that those with the most immaculate social personas often experience episodes of shadow eruption, sudden, uncontrollable moments where repressed psychic energy explodes, often in destructive, unpredictable ways. This dynamic explains why those who appear most perfect, polished, composed, unshakably virtuous, are sometimes capable of the most shocking acts of destruction. Complete identification with the social persona, Jung wrote, is a betrayal of the self, a sacrifice of authentic individuality for the approval of the collective. And like all betrayals, it demands a price. Imagine you're speaking with someone and suddenly, without warning, you sense something shift. The same face, the same voice, but something ancient and impersonal stirs behind the eyes. A presence that is not quite human. Many traditional cultures knew this phenomenon well. They called it possession. Jung called it something even more precise, archetypal possession, perhaps the most dangerous sign the psyche can manifest. Archetypes in Jung's psychology are not mere symbols. They are primordial structures of the collective unconscious, forces so vast and ancient they defy comprehension, each containing both luminous wisdom and chaotic shadow. When a person becomes overtaken by an archetype, they are no longer themselves. Their ego dissolves and they become a vessel for transpersonal energies that far exceed their capacity to integrate. Shamanic traditions understood this distinction deeply. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade documented how shamans learned to channel spirits without becoming consumed by them. But when possession overtakes the self, there is no guidance, no boundary, only surrender to something that no longer belongs to you. Christian mystics spoke of the discernment of spirits, the ability to distinguish between inner movements that heal and those that destroy. The warning sign, a loss of psychological flexibility. The person becomes locked in a single pattern: the savior, the warrior, the victim, the judge. It doesn't matter which archetype it is. What matters is the total identification with it. Look into their eyes. Do you see a strange, almost inhuman glow? Listen to their voice. Do you hear a monolithic certainty, a message without hesitation, without doubt, without nuance? As Jungian analyst Robert Moore observed, you are not speaking to a full person anymore. You are speaking to an archetypal fragment that has seized control of the psyche. Modern neuropsychology confirms this transformation. In altered states of possession, the brain regions linked to personal identity dim, while areas associated with mystical or transpersonal experience flare with activity. In ritual contexts, this may be sacred, but when it happens spontaneously, without grounding or guidance, it is perilous. Why? Because the possessed individual feels something extraordinary, absolute clarity. Gone is the ambiguity of ordinary life. They no longer question, they no longer doubt, they know. And that is what makes them so dangerous. Jung noted how archetypally possessed leaders, political, religious, even revolutionary, could ignite mass movements precisely because of this superhuman certainty. But there is a shadow hidden in every archetype. The savior archetype includes both divine compassion and violent fanaticism. The more a person identifies with an archetype, the more likely they are to unconsciously act out its dark side, often in complete contradiction to their professed values. Jung documented countless cases where individuals, in the grip of archetypal possession, committed shocking acts they could not later explain. rationalizing them, or forgetting them altogether. In those moments, they lost what makes us truly human, the capacity for self-reflection. But there is an even deeper tragedy, a psychic pattern so haunting that when you recognize it in someone, you know you're witnessing the unraveling of a soul. Jung called it the compulsion to repeat. An unconscious drive to recreate the same destructive patterns over and over, as if trapped in a maze with no exit. And when you see it clearly in someone else, a chilling realization dawns. You are now inside their psychological drama, one that does not belong to you. The danger of the compulsion to repeat is its automatic nature. The person is not choosing their self-destruction. They are being driven by forces they do not understand. As psychoanalyst Christopher Bollas wrote, these are unthought knowns, early or traumatic experiences that were never processed, but now shape every relationship, every decision, like an invisible puppet master. Even ancient spiritual traditions understood this. In early Buddhism, karma did not mean reward or punishment. It meant this: psychic conditioning that leads us to recreate the same suffering, lifetime after lifetime, until the pattern is finally seen and broken. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the doctrine of original sin is often misunderstood, but psychologically, it can be seen as something far more profound, the inheritance of unconscious patterns that shape our lives without our consent. These are not choices, they are scripts, written long before we knew how to speak. The warning sign emerges when you observe someone who always seems to end up in the same kind of suffering. Different faces, different settings, but always the same story. And what's most disturbing? They seem genuinely surprised, as if fate had singled them out, as if destiny had betrayed them, rather than confronting the reality that they are the unconscious author of their own pain. Contemporary neuroscience has revealed the roots of this tragedy. Early experiences, especially traumatic ones, create literal neural pathways, grooves in the mind that become default routes for processing reality. The brain begins to expect pain, and without knowing why, it starts to seek it. The most dangerous part? Those trapped in repetition compulsions unconsciously recruit others into their private tragedy. As psychoanalyst Donald Kalsched observed, unprocessed trauma demands to be staged, and so, without knowing it, you may be drawn into a story that began long before you arrived, cast in a role you never agreed to play. Jung uncovered something even more haunting. The deeper the unconscious pattern, the more it orchestrates the external world. The person begins to attract events and people that mirror their internal wounds. They call it coincidence. But it is something else, synchronicity, a cruel echo of the unresolved, a choreography of fate written in the hidden layers of the psyche. Jungian therapists recognize this signal when they hear the same story told again and again. A life of betrayal, abandonment, injustice. Different actors, but the same scene played on repeat like a cursed ritual. Marie-Louise von Franz captured the essence. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What's most unsettling is the magnetic pull of these patterns. They do not merely trap the individual, they radiate outward, invisible signals emitted into the world that attract the very people who will help them repeat the wound. Jung named this terrifying force negative synchronicity, the unconscious summoning exactly what it needs to perpetuate its suffering. But there is a way out, a signal of the opposite kind, the rarest and most powerful sign that someone has faced their inner abyss and returned intact. It is not perfection, it is not virtue, it is something far more valuable, shadow integration. This is the core difference between those who unconsciously project danger and those who have begun the journey toward wholeness. And here's the paradox. You can recognize this transformation instantly. Just as we intuit the presence of a mask, we can also feel the presence of someone who has removed theirs. Shadow integration does not mean the absence of darkness. It means the conscious ownership of it. It is not purity, but the hard-earned humility that comes from knowing that everything we fear in others also lives within us. As Jung said, "I would rather be whole than good." There's a phrase often misunderstood, yet it marks the exact border between authentic psychological integrity and a brittle mask of moral perfection. I would rather be whole than good. This is not an excuse for indulgence. It is the recognition that true sanity does not come from suppression, but from transformation. For centuries, contemplative traditions have spoken of this alchemical process. In Tibetan Buddhism, turning poison into medicine. In Western alchemy, Jung's obsession. Transmuting lead into gold. Not literal metal, but the rejected parts of the self, brought into conscious light. The signs of this integration are unmistakable. A strange, rare fusion of brutal honesty about one's shadows and deep compassion for the shadows of others. This person is not interested in maintaining the illusion of purity. They can name their impulses, their anger, their envy, without collapsing into shame or justifying it away. They understand this is the human condition. It requires vigilance, not denial. Modern neuroscience now confirms what mystics always knew. Researchers like Daniel Siegel have shown how psychological integration creates new neural pathways, literal bridges between primitive emotional centers and the brain's reflective cortex. When you face what you've tried to avoid, your brain rewires. And suddenly, the monster in the dark corner becomes a source of unexpected power. As Jungian analyst Robert Johnson said, "What we deny does not disappear. It simply emerges in forms over which we have less control." Integration doesn't erase darkness. It transforms it from destructive force to available creative energy. And you can feel this in someone. There's a quality, a stillness, a refusal to fall into black and white thinking, a gaze that sees complexity where others see threat. They do not claim innocence, they do not chase perfection. As James Hollis put it, psychological maturity begins when we abandon the fantasy of our absolute innocence. True spiritual teachers embody this paradox. The Dalai Lama speaks of his moments of anger. Teresa of Avila confessed to spiritual emptiness. Rumi wrote poems that bleed with contradiction. It is the radical honesty of someone who no longer fears their reflection. So how do we recognize someone who has stepped onto this path? They are humble, but not falsely modest. They hold authority, but not through domination. They no longer perform goodness, because they have outgrown the addiction to a spotless image. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's, there are few." So before we part, ask yourself, have you recognized these signals in someone close to you? Or more disturbingly, have you seen the dangerous patterns in your own reflection? If this message pierced something in your heart, share your experience in the comments. Remember, consciousness is the first step toward transformation. Share this with someone trapped in patterns they can't yet see. Hit the bell, subscribe, and stay with us as we descend deeper into the haunting terrain of the Jungian unconscious.